Hi, everyone. I'm Scott, and welcome to Bad Bleeps of the Bible. We're doing things a little bit differently today, and we're going to start at the end of the story. The year is 852 BCE, and we're in northern Israel. King Ahab has been dead for over 10 years, and in his stead, his Phoenician queen has ruled in his place through their two sons. Now, she is hated. She is despised, with the hate having been spurred on by the prophet of Israel named Elijah. He's denounced her as a murderer, a harlot, a Baal acolyte, an idol worshiper, a bringer of evil to Israel, and has even gone so far as to incite civil war by anointing a new king of Israel, a dude named Jehu. Now, here we are, where the queen stands alone against all of those detractors who have, since the beginning of her reign, called for her head. And again, those detractors now have their opportunity. Her husband is dead, her children have been killed, and she stands as the last piece in their eventual coup. Aware that her fate is sealed, she prepares herself for the inevitable. She paints her eyes with jet black coal, she dresses her hair, and she puts on her finest jewels, and she waits. And this is actually symbolic. She's indicating her dignity, her royal status, and her determination to go out of this life as the queen that she is. And as the blood-soaked and newly anointed King Jehu rides into Jezreel victorious, he heads to the palace where she's waiting and ready. And with defiance, she yells from the balcony, screaming, "Had Zimri peace, who slew his master?" This sentence recognizing the death of her son, the king, and her non-recognition of this new rebel overthrower. And in this moment, Jehu orders the queen's eunuchs, unknowingly to the queen, turned traitors, to toss her from the window. And they do. And in graphic detail, the Old Testament author describes her end. They write, "They threw her down, and her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled her." Then Jehu went inside and ate and drank. And once sated, he ordered his men to attend to that cursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter. But it's too late. When they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. With this, the queen's enemy, the prophet Elijah, his prophecy was fulfilled. He prophesied that the dogs would devour the flesh of the queen, and the carcass of her was like unto dung on the ground, so that none will be able to say, "This was Jezebel." So we're burying the lead a little bit, and obviously today's bleep is Jezebel, a name synonymous with evil, but also perhaps misunderstood. We know the end of the story. Now let's go back to see how we got here. So Jezebel's arrival in Israel had always been contentious, to say the least. But her marriage between the current king of Israel, Ahab, and this Phoenician princess, Jezebel, was truly not necessarily unexpected. It was planned, and it was meant to unify and pacify the two countries of Phoenicia and Israel. What was unexpected, though, was how the union of these two individuals cemented their place in history as two of the most evil rulers in Israel's history. You see, first, Jezebel was a Canaanite and an idol worshiper and a Baal worshiper. All three strikes against her in the eyes of the Israelites. And then we have Ahab, current king, who is described as having done evil in the sight of the Lord more than all of the men who were before him. So it stands to reason that such a man, an evil man, should take as his wife someone questionable and questionably just as evil. And truly questionable she was. So we know that she was a worshiper of the god Baal, who, if you don't know, was a nature and fertility god. And according to some historical sources, in order to worship this god, it was demanded that it must be of the most debased and sensual kind of worship. Of course, this is just one take on this, so it's questionable, and it could come through revisionist history, as we know. So take that with a grain of salt, but some people state this. Ahab, though, loved this about his wife Jezebel, and he showed his love by erecting a temple to Baal, complete with an altar and Baal priests that were shipped in from her homeland of Phoenicia. And this absolutely flew in the face of Israel's traditional religion to this point. And of course, we know at this point that you can probably guess who wasn't happy at all. That was the God of the Bible at this time, Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, who was not ready to share his worship with anyone. And Yahweh, in retaliation, calls up his prophet at the time, Elijah, to start laying out the law to King Ahab and his new wife, Jezebel. And with this, Elijah becomes Jezebel's number one enemy. One source I found actually describes this relationship of Jezebel's and Elijah's like this. So I'm going to read you the quote. Jezebel is contrasted with and juxtaposed to the prophet Elijah, to the extent that they both form two panels of a mirrored painting. She is a Baal supporter, he is a Yahweh supporter. She is a woman, he is a man. She is a foreigner, he is a native. She has monarchic power, he has prophetic power. She threatens and he flees, but finally he wins and she is liquidated, literally. The real conflict is not between Ahab, the king, and Elijah, but between Jezebel, the queen in actuality, and Elijah. So truly, this is a dichotomy between these two. We have Jezebel versus Elijah. And so zooming out from this story for just a hot second, there are three actions or points in our story that have really created Jezebel's reputation and cemented her as possibly the most evil person of the Old Testament. We'll discuss whether that's warranted at the end of this story, but we're going to get here. So the first was, of course, bringing the worship of Baal in such a strong way to the nation of Israel. But this also included the murder of many of God's priests. And even going further, in one source I found, it compares the worship of Baal akin to today's Christians embracing Satan. So this would be like a new president's wife bringing in the worship of Satan to the United States, and the president loves it, and he erects temples to Satan. That's how it's compared. So that's offense number one. The second offense committed by Jezebel was a fancy little competition between Elijah, God, and Baal, which resulted in some unfortunate results for the priests of Baal and ignited Jezebel's fury. We'll find out what that is. And the third comes when we discuss Naboth and his vineyard. So those are the three offenses. I just wanted to lay the framework out before diving further into her story. So we're hopping back to the second of Jezebel's offenses, this competition between Elijah and the priests of Baal. The more major of Jezebel and Elijah's disagreements comes when Yahweh, God, punishes Israel yet again for their idol worship by inflicting a 3-year drought in the kingdom of Israel. Obviously, Elijah, the prophet of God, blames Jezebel for this, and Jezebel blames Elijah and therefore God, which she's technically not necessarily wrong. God definitely did this to Israel. But she does maybe go one step too far. Seizing the initiative, Jezebel claims that truly what the country needs is more priests of Baal, and imports 450 priests, again, from her native country of Phoenicia, and unfortunately, in the first of her many murderous offenses, has lots and lots of Yahweh's prophets murdered. So much so that there's only one prophet left, and that is Elijah. Elijah, obviously PO'd by both the murder and the blasphemy of Jezebel, challenges Jezebel's prophets to a competition, a very super visible competition on the top of a high hill called Mount Carmel. He gathers all of the people of Israel that were nearby, which is a lot, I would assume, considering this was like the head of the state in the area, and shouts, "How long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. I alone am left as a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Therefore, let them give us 2 bulls, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves. Cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God." So, long speech, basically saying, we're going to prepare 2 sacrifices. We're going to cut up the bull. We're going to put it on the grill, but we're not going to light a fire because we're going to see which God actually lights the fire under the bull. Challenge accepted. And for a whole entire day, Jezebel's 450 prophets performed a hopping dance and cried under the altar, and at times even mutilating themselves with swords and lances, but nothing happens. Then it's Elijah's turn, and the response is almost immediate. He begins to pray, and the text states then that fire from the Lord descended and consumed not only the burnt offering, but the wood, the stones, and the earth around it. God was not only showing his power, he was saying, I almost said a word here, people, you need to get it together. Look at my mic compared to this. When they saw, truly all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, "The Lord alone is God." And what Elijah does next, not Jezebel, Elijah does next, is where I raise a bit of an eyebrow to whether Jezebel is really the only one at fault here. For far from being a gracious winner, Elijah orders the slaughter of the 450 prophets of Baal as revenge for the earlier murder of Yahweh's priests, sort of an eye for an eye thing. Of course, this competition did not sit well for our femme fatale Queen Jezebel. She was humiliated. Her priests were killed, and so her crosshairs were firmly placed on Elijah, who promptly yeeted himself away from the scene of this crime. So we have 2 of our 3 offenses, remember, for Jezebel. First, she brought the worship of Baal, a la Satan, all of that, to Israel. Second, she killed a bunch of Yahweh's prophets, but lost the competition, ticking her off and finding Elijah. And now, the final nail in the coffin of Jezebel's reputation comes when the lightly mentioned in the story, but still currently evil husband of Queen Jezebel, Ahab, desires a vineyard owed by a dude named Naboth. I'm not sure why the king of Israel really needed a vineyard. I'm sure he could just build one himself, build a beautiful one himself. But no, he definitely wanted Naboth's vineyard. It must have had some delicious grapes. No one knows. But it turns out that this vineyard is special to our dude Naboth. In fact, it was in his family for a very long time and was part of his inheritance. So he outright refuses to sell to the king. The Bible then tells us that Ahab had a literal childlike fit, saying that Ahab laid down on his bed, turned away his face, and would eat no food. Truly like a baby, he threw himself down, is crying and saying, "No, I will not eat." It's here, though, that Jezebel comes to her king and asks, "Why are you so sad?" And Ahab tells her what happened, that Naboth wouldn't sell him the vineyard. And truly, Jezebel knows exactly what to do. She tells Ahab, "You are the king and have authority of Israel. Eat, be happy. Let me take care of this for you." And it's here where, as one source puts it, Jezebel reinforces the eternal image of her as a scheming, murderous vixen. She forges the king's signature on a document, so basically writes his name, saying that Naboth hath blasphemed Yahweh God, and that for his treachery he should be killed. No, he should be stoned to death. And she went even so far as to seal it with the king's own seal. So she faked his signature and sealed it with his seal. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happens. She sends this order, and Naboth is executed outside of the city. Jezebel then informs Ahab that, sure, go seize his vineyard. Guess what? He's not there anymore. And Ahab does just that. And then we have our old friend, Jezebel's enemy, Elijah, coming back into the picture to condemn Ahab for committing both theft and murder. And as punishment, God decreed Ahab's death, the annihilation of his complete royal line, and also decreed Jezebel's death. And it's here where Elijah prophesies that for her offenses, for being so evil, her corpse is to be devoured by dogs. And it's only 3 years later that Ahab dies in battle, and quite spectacularly dies in battle. So he rides into battle against the Syrians and is wounded. But refusing to surrender, he's propped up on his chariot and rides back into battle again. And this time it does not go so well, and he's killed. But killed so much, again, this is a very gory story for some reason, killed so much that the Bible says that his blood ran out from his wound onto the floor of his chariot. And in gross detail, it says that someone, when they were washing the chariot at a pool in Samaria, the dogs licked up the blood of Ahab while the harlots bathed in the water. Okay, so we have Ahab's gross death, and then now we have Ahab's son and Jezebel's son. Oh God, I do this every time with this name. Ahaziah. That sounds good. Ahaziah, his son, inherits the throne and continues the worship of Baal just as his now deceased father, but still alive and thriving mother. It's only 2 years later that he dies from a particularly nasty fall through the lattice of an upper room. And actually, in his final moments, he calls for Elijah, interestingly enough, to come save him. So he doesn't call for Baal's prophets, he calls for Elijah. But Elijah, being the petty boy that he is, refuses, and the king's son dies. And it's here we have the beginning of the end for Jezebel, because she's seeing the writing on the wall that Ahab's line is slowly but surely being destroyed, annihilated, which means that it's only a short amount of time where her prophecy, eaten by dogs, would be fulfilled. So shortly after the death of the king's son, Jezebel's son as well, a dude named Jehu is anointed as king by the new prophet Elisha, Elijah's successor. It's not super important. Don't worry about it. And this is in direct opposition to Jezebel and Ahab's son, who is currently reigning on the throne, and therefore the start of the civil war in Israel. And in a hot flurry of names and fights and messes, which I'm not going to include here, Jehu swiftly makes quick work of Jezebel's final supporters and son, killing anyone who stands in his way to the throne. And now we're back where we started, with blood-soaked Jehu approaching Jezreel, the seat of the palace, and therefore Queen Jezebel. And we know how this ends. Jezebel goes out of this world like the literal queen that she is, adorned in her finery, being cast from a tall window. And unfortunately, her body is then eaten by stray dogs, just as the prophet Elijah, her arch nemesis, had prophesied. And all that was left of Jezebel, as we know, are her feet, her skull, and the palms of her hands. And so ends the story of Jezebel, who truly elevates her status as a bad BLEEP in her ruthlessness, her cunning, her power, and her notoriety. Her name is literally synonymous with evil. But is she as bad as she's painted in the Bible? I would truly say no. And I'm not going to lie, she was actually one of the inspirations for this podcast. Remember, this podcast was originally going to be titled Bad witches with a B of the Bible, but decided to switch it up. She was my inspiration because I would argue no. I don't know if she's as evil as she's been painted. There's super little doubt that the biblical accounts needed to distort her story for several reasons. The first was her power and sway on the nation of Israel. It wasn't right, according to those misogynistic and masculine-dominated historical retellings of her story. So they needed to paint her as an ultra-villain. I don't know what my voice just did there, just ignore it. Was she actually that much of a villain if we reverse time and actually went back into history? We don't know, but probably not. But we do know that by all accounts, first, she was a shrewd politician. She was an educated royal princess by birth, and she had political power on her own. As one source puts it, she had her own table, in air quotes. That is, her own economic establishment and her own budget. She had her own profits. She created a religious establishment that she controlled. And all of these things point toward the fact that she maybe held, or she did hold, an official or semi-official position that she held because she was good at it. She had royal origins and she had connections. And truly, despite the references to the more base claims of the Bible calling her a harlot, and for more on that, see the Rahab episode, there's literally zero evidence from the Bible or anywhere that Jezebel was first a sex worker or two, even an unfaithful wife. Yet here we are, vilifying her, creating this horrible monster that is the person Jezebel. Honestly, perhaps Jezebel has just been the victim of a society that can't stand to see women in any sort of power, and therefore has to paint said powerful women as somehow different or deranged or degenerate. Seems to be a trend throughout history that is just as pervasive today as it was a millennia ago. Ha! Regardless, though, Jezebel-esque characters have appeared everywhere from I Love Lucy to even The Muppet Show, and her legacy, whether good or bad, has really stood the test of time. And as a closer, I'm going to leave you with this quote from Michael Satchell in a source that I read, who says, "From Lady Macbeth to Lizzie Borden, among history's most famous female villains, fictional or real, the pagan queen of Kings 1 and 2 still rules as possibly the most wicked and enduring of them all." That is our bad bleep, Queen Jezebel. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Please feel free to get in touch with me and share your thoughts at badbleepsofthebible@gmail.com and Instagram at badbleepsofthebible. Sources for today's story can be found in our show notes, and please rate, review, and subscribe. Catch you next time, and if you have a gorgeous vineyard, better watch out for murderous wives. Bye-bye.